Hey, up all right? Yeah, good, you? Good. Hey? No, step away from the drill. Honestly. Yeah, I know I'm the guy that's always saying drill to conditions, not the calendar, but can we get the calendar back on the wall? Sorry? Yeah, I know people with complexions such as mine need to be careful in the current weather. Yeah, no, it's still way too soon. I know it's lovely and warm in the day, but these nighttime temperatures, especially for the next week or 10 days, are still really low. Really not building the charge in terms of soil temperatures where we need to be. Yeah, I know the ground conditions are brilliant. There's always that risk that they might change, but at the moment, yeah, we're only going to be setting ourselves up for a fail if it is that we put it in now, I reckon. Yeah, another couple of weeks and we should be there. Remember, for likes of maize, you need that soil temperature at 8 degrees centigrade for at least a week. Nice, good bit of weather on the horizon after that and we'll be there, but we're just not there at the minute. It's too cold at night. Yeah, park it up. All right, brilliant. Cheers, mate. Catch you later. Bye-bye, bye. Holy moly. How are you? Welcome back to the channel. Bit of a recap video today. We're back in the Forage Rye crop I was in only a couple of weeks ago. It's looking fairly different already, isn't it? A few question and answers that have come in since I started doing these videos as well, but also a few top tips to consider at the moment for those summer forage crop options. So we are the first week of April, and don't be too disheartened if your Forage Rye crops aren't necessarily looking like this. Not all the crops that I have in with customers necessarily look like this. That said, this crop has been around about 2 to 3 weeks behind where I'd normally expect it to see, or at least want them to be. But if your crops aren't this far forward, as I say, don't be too disheartened. It's only understandable. We've still not had the easiest of winters, and especially after the last 2 years, soils are still really feeling it. You can see it in them. You can see it in the crops that they produce, that overall, they're fairly just worn out and tired. Now, as I promised, I said I'd bring you along the way to have a look at this Forage Rye crop all the way through till harvest. That first video that I did was only 2 weeks ago, but as you can see, it's really started growing fairly hard. Again, as I said, these crops have the potential to do. What's most impressive though is actually the vetches. We did put a bit of vetch in this crop just to see what it would do. I did question whether or not it would be overly successful, especially considering the winter that we'd had. But they've really motored on over the last couple of weeks, and overall the crop at the moment is around about knee high. So a really good crop that's looking as though it might be making up a bit of time that we've lost over the winter. Now, including the likes of vetch within Forage Rye is more akin to that cover crop requirement. Those earlier drill crops where that vetch can really get established into warmer conditions. It was another one of those scenarios where we weren't too sure, but let's have a go. And we chucked it in with the Forage Rye, mixed it in as we went, 25 kilo bags of vetch to every ton of overall Forage Rye, seed that went into the drill, just to see how it performs. Can we add that little bit extra diversity to the crop and potentially some extra protein yield too? As I say, I did have my questions up until a couple of weeks ago, but at the moment it's looking like it's really successful and hopefully going to be another option for us to add to our overall advice to growers for these situations in between maize. Quite a few of you have reached out and sent me messages and questions ever since I started posting these videos. So I decided to collect a few of those together and share the answers with you. I thought it might be useful. First question actually came from an individual who I'd been working with for quite some time now, and they asked me, why now? Why have you started putting these videos together? Well, actually, as I say, I started around about 9 years ago doing bits and pieces on YouTube, but in a very different format. It was just videos, not me rattling on, it was just content of good bits of machinery and nice looking crops. But ultimately, I just enjoy helping people. I've relied incredibly heavily on certain individuals in industry and locally to me throughout my time within agriculture to help me, to give me that guidance, give me that knowledge that I've then taken forward into the job that I do today. As I say, for me, there's nothing better to see that level of input and advice that you can give to any UK farmer and give those overall results and therefore performance on farm, especially from the likes of Forage, from the help that you can give them. Since I posted the rye video, one of the many questions that kept popping up was, Can we utilise rye not necessarily just for cutting after maize? Yes, you can. I mentioned that if it is that you're looking to grow forage rye to have as a forageable crop at the end of April, not to drill it too early, because it will be too far forward and potentially create issues around lodging and things like that before it gets to its optimum stage and when you want to take it at the end of April. However, if it is, for example, you are looking to produce a lump of forage within a rotation where brassicas may not be an option, so for example the likes of overwintered sheep, if you've got land access and the grower already has a brassica, it may well be all seed rate within the rotation, and they don't want to establish the likes of stubble turnips in there for overwintering forage, the likes of forage rye are really good opportunities for that. I mentioned in that video how traditionally that's what forage rye was always used for. It was always there as your early bite, your early grazing, or possibly over winter before that. So establishing forage rye earlier than we would tend to see it going in after maize is definitely a key option for having that lump of forage over the winter and into the spring. Not only is forage rye becoming a more popular option in between those maize crops, it's already well established as an option within arable rotations to have as a cover crop over the winter, especially with vetch mixed in it as well. I've also had a couple of questions regarding those sorts of types of crops and whether or not they are worth taking for forage. Absolutely. If it is that that crop is established in good time, it's plenty of yield, plenty of growth about it, definitely an option if it is that you can take it for forage rather than that crop being ploughed in. It will still have done its environmental benefits, it will still have created that massive root structure within the soil profile, which will enhance soil conditions going forward within that arable rotation. The only one thing that I would bear in mind is, again, coming back to the point I made regarding forage rye varieties that are suitable for forage or cover crop, you may well see a little less performance out of those cover crop types, but also the seed rate tends to be a lot lower as well. Therefore, compared to the likes of the crop that I'm in today and the seed rate that this has, overall yield may not necessarily be as high as we would tend to expect, but still a lump of forage that's definitely worth having if you have the opportunity. Now, throughout that forage rye video, I also discussed forage rye as an option to establish behind an early harvested crop of maize. Hopefully those earlier varieties are being utilised, and especially the advances that breeders are bringing in terms of performance to the UK market. But again, one of the questions that I had was around, would I prefer to see a crop undersown or have a following crop established behind it? Now, when it comes to undersowing maize, I do plan to put a video together regarding the ins and outs of undersowing a maize crop. In the first instance, one of the biggest limiting factors for undersowing maize is actually a grower's access to a drill to do it in the region close to them. If it is that they suggest that actually I'm always possibly going to struggle to establish a crop after my maize has been harvested, first of all, I would question whether or not we're actually growing maize on the best ground in that situation. If it is that you can't get in with a direct drill only a matter of days after harvest of maize, should we have really been in there with foragers and tractors the day before? But if it is that you are concerned that you can't do that, definitely undersowing maize with the likes of a grass mixture give you that opportunity to have a crop that is established under the maize, improve conditions at harvest, and give you that overwintered not only cover but also forage potential as well before going back into maize. Now on to a few top tips for the spring. As you'll have heard me mention at the beginning of the video there's a lot of growers that are getting very itchy in terms of wanting to start drilling. Again, totally understandable with the conditions that we're currently having. But we do need to bear in mind those nighttime temperatures for the vast majority of us. In the grand scheme of things, the majority of the UK is receiving around about the same sort of type of weather day in, day out at the moment, anywhere between 15 to 18 degrees in the day, but actually down to near on frost at night. Those soil temperatures that we need to establish any crop, especially forage crops in the spring, aren't really just necessarily building quite yet. All that energy that is being built in the day is quickly being absorbed by the colder temperatures at night. For the likes of maize in particular, we need that requirement of around about 8 degrees centigrade for at least a week in soil temperatures, with a good 2 to 3 weeks of good warm weather on the horizon to ensure that that maize will get established and grow without looking back. Another key consideration for those of you who are looking to put summer forage crops in, the likes of skyfall as a bounce back brassica, the likes of interval as a forage rate maybe. For those varieties and those species, we've got to be really careful that we don't let these crops vernalise. vernalize. That's a weird word. Vernalization is basically the sexual reproduction phase of a plant. If it is that these plants get cold, they're able to vernalize. So because of that, what we don't want to see our summer forage crops do is go through that vernalization process. If they do get cold and you've taken all the advantages of the conditions in terms of drilling conditions at the moment, what we tend to see is that those crops run a massive risk of actually not just producing you big leafy forage over the summer, but actually being able to go to head. They will be able to bolt. They've gone through that reproductive process. So what you'll end up with is actually not only a forage crop, but a forage crop that looks like a crop of oilseed rape. If it is that you're unsure as to how to measure your soil temperatures, especially in a year like this, dead simple. Jump on Amazon, type in soil thermometer, and you'll find plenty of options. It only costs you about a tenner, but it's really important that you take those soil temperatures, if it is that you are going to check where soil temperatures are on your farm, first thing in the morning. Don't check them at lunchtime when it is that you've got perhaps half an hour just to nip out and have a look. That's when they're going to be at their highest. Go out first thing in the morning, put that soil thermometer in and give you a reading. Record it. As I say, you need to see those soil temperatures of around about 8 degrees for at least a week to start making those plans and those decisions. Again, I understand the fact that the ground conditions that we have for travelling are incredibly favourable at the moment. And it may well be that actually, for all this dry weather that we've had, we may well end up chasing our tail in terms of trying to retain moisture within these crops and within these seed beds once we do get them established. But ultimately, that's only 50% of the risk. The other 50% is going in too soon and not getting these seeds established into warm enough conditions. I've just travelled down the road and I brought you with me to assess these forage rye crops on behalf of a customer who's got the opportunity to take these at the end of April before this ground goes back into maize again. Now you'll perhaps already be able to see behind me, these crops of forage rye look very different already. And they are. They've been established in a slightly different way. This is actually a cover crop mix of forage rye that's gone in, so a mixture of forage rye and vetch. You'll remember on my previous video we discussed the differences between forage ryes for forage production use and also those forage ryes to also be aware of that are for cover crop use only. Not only is the growth habit different in terms of these varieties that have been used for cover crop, but also the overall seed rate. They tend to be established at a much lower seed rate when it is that they're mixed with the likes of vetch. But why is that? It's because of cost. There's extra work, time, production requirements when it comes to ripping and tipping the bags of vetch, ripping and tipping the bags of rye, blending those, rebagging them and getting them out to you as a grower. So to ensure that overall return on investment and that they still stack up commercially, seed rates do tend to be a lot lower. Therefore we do initially start with a much more thinner crop for cover crop use than we would do for the likes of forage production overall. So what we can see straight away is that plant population. Plants have established, we have got that green cover that's done the job over the winter, but compared to the forage rye that we've just been in, that's been grown and selected more as a forage purpose, this is a much lower seed rate and therefore we do have a thinner crop. The plants that are there, they are well established, they're getting away and they're really moving now, and there will be a level of forage to be taken from this. But just something to bear in mind, if you are being offered these crops of forage rye to take within rotations, depending on the way that they've been established, the mixtures that have gone in, it can have quite a big difference in terms of that final outcome when it comes to forage production. So in this crop at that lower seed rate is the success of the vetches. Because it's a lot thinner, because it's a lot more open, they have been, these delicate legumes, exposed to a lot more weather. You'll only tend to find them where the crop has established better and it's given that little bit more cover. Different farm now, and we're walking a piece of ground that this time last year was existing long-term grass. And it's hard to believe on a day like today, but actually this field, when it was in grass before it was into maize, it was a real nightmare to actually walk across. However, I decided it'd be a good idea in a year like last year to give maize a bit of a crack. So the maize was established late, it was an ultra early variety. Later went into this ground, managed to harvest it. Did have to juggle the weather a little bit, but then we were able to establish a crop of forage rye in behind it. So this is what we're into today. As I say, we're leagues ahead of where we were this time last year. Overall, this crop, I would say, as per a lot of crops that we've already looked at today, they are going to be that little bit behind. But this sort of type of ground, not only to potentially grow a crop of maize on it, never mind establish a crop of forage rye behind it, has been a real key achievement by the farmer. It's great to see. It gives us that winter cover that we're looking for, but also that overall forage yield at the end of April. Now at the other end of this field, there's something interesting for us to have a look at together, and comparing the likes of those Westerwolds with forage rye, as I discussed in my first video. Now we're going to partake in one of those favourite pastimes in agriculture. We're going to farm over the fence together. You'll remember from my forage rye video, we discussed the differences of Westerwolds and in particular forage rye, especially around that winter hardiness. How Westerwolds can, in ideal situations, produce a significant level of forage, especially after maize, but they actually are the most frailer options. They can get zapped over the winter and not necessarily give you that level of robustness. So join me as I head through the hedge and we'll have a look at how these two fields side by side can compare. Oh Jesus, it's like going to the secret garden. I'll put you through the wire so you can see. So in this neighbouring field, Westerwolds have been established over the winter behind maize. Now, not being critical of the grower who's put these in, but I think this is a real good demonstration of a side-by-side situation where it highlights how Westerwolds may not just necessarily be as robust over that winter period, especially in the more challenging climates. Now arguably this field that we're looking at here is probably the more favourable out of the two. However, the Westerwolds are still looking fairly anemic and look to have struggled over the winter. Conversely, we flip ourselves round to look at the forage rye. Yes, we've got a few wet spots. It has been a bit of a challenge this field, but overall we've got a much greener crop that's better established and therefore giving us greater opportunity to produce forage at the end of April ahead of going back into maize. Now just whilst I'm on this farm, I'm just having a quick whip round the grass layers whilst I'm here. You might recognise this field as the field where my YouTube journey began. This field and the one over the hedge are actually less than 12 months old. They weren't established until late spring last year, again following the conditions that we've been having, so they didn't go into around about May. Now they're actually compliant for the SFI SAM3 system. SFI was introduced within farms over England in the last 12 to 18 months. Now I think it's fair to say we've all learnt and experienced a lot over the last 12 months with the introduction of SFI, not least within the seed industry, and how to provide these mixtures that are required for these new schemes. When it comes to the SAM3 options, and especially from the expanded offer, the Masterlays grass seed range now has 16 different options when it comes to SAM3 requirement, or CSAM3. It's quite significant, but also really important. It's our firm belief that actually you can't just stick one of these mixtures in and expect it to fill a production gap and tick a SFI box whilst it goes along. There's all sorts of different inquiries, questions and requirements for these sorts of types of mixtures, so we need to tailor them. So therefore you end up with 16 brand new mixtures to cater for the requirements of you UK farmers. Now this reseed that I'm in at the moment, as I say, didn't get established at the end of May last year, but still managed to have 3 cuts off it throughout the 2024 growing period within a multi-cut system, and actually had sheep on it over the winter. This is Masterlays SAM3 cutting option, so it is designed to be within a multi-cut system but still cater for the requirements of SAM3. I won't go into too much detail around CSAM3s and SFIs today. I just thought I'd bring you along just to have a quick look at it whilst I'm in it today, but we'll have that for another day. There's still plenty to talk about. But before I go, we'll just take a bit of a deep dive just to see how this mixture is looking, especially after being grazed with sheep and plenty of cuts last year already. Now these sorts of mixtures shouldn't really be necessarily overcomplicated. However, I appreciate they have created a lot of conversation over the last 12 months, making sure that these mixtures not only fit your traditional requirements but also meet the requirements and the aims of the SFI requirement for SAM3. They shouldn't be overcomplicated. They should still be able to perform within the rotations that you're looking for them to fit and the production that you're looking to get from them. However, I appreciate there'll still be a lot of questions about how they perform, how to manage them, and even regarding some of those mixtures that have already been established. But as you can see, this is how they should look, similar to what you've already had, however containing that little bit more diversity, especially with the likes of the legumes, and also there's a bit of plantain in there as well from that herb fraction. As I say, we'll look a little bit more closer detail for the likes of the SAM3s and forward, but I bring you along just to see how these mixtures are looking today. So that's me home from an afternoon spin around a few farms. Thanks for coming with me. Hopefully you found some of those updates and what we've discussed today useful. With regards to the crops that are yet to come, as I say, I know the conditions currently are really tempting, but please do bear in mind that those soil temperatures just aren't quite there yet. We're all forecast cold nights for another week to 10 days, and the last thing I want to hear is that you guys have managed to establish these crops in good time, only for them to fail and possibly need re-drilling. And look, that's coming from the guy who sells seed. So please do bear in mind those overall soil temperatures. You now know how to go out and record them and what we're looking to achieve. So please, just give it that little bit more time and hopefully ensure success going forward. As ever, please like, share, subscribe, click on that little bell, and I'll see you for the next one. Bye for now.